Good afternoon, everyone. This is George Kriza with Challenging Decisions. We're excited today to have a SharePoint expert with us, Therman Trotman, who is the owner of SharePoint Helpdesk. And, SharePoint's an interesting application. It's been around for a number of years. How long has it been around, Thurman?
A really long time. I remember when I first started working on it, it was I was working on the version 2007. But that was on 2000, that was in 2009. I was working on 2007. But it's
Yeah,
even older than that.
I think it's about 20 years old.
Yeah, I think it celebrated a birthday the other day.
Yeah, and so I have a number of questions. I used to operate a company with about 30 people in it,
Nice.
and I think I had well, let's just describe it, a minimal amount of exposure to SharePoint. I think someone more or less imposed it on me at one point, and we used it briefly, and I never really came back to it. In true Microsoft fashion, the Microsoft user base um, defaults to the Microsoft applications. At least that's been my experience. And by the way, if you looked at my background, I go all the way back to 1981 in the computer industry.
Nice.
Yeah, I watched both Apple and Microsoft unfold and become the behemoths that they are.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I think they're the number one and number two companies in the United States, if not the world, at this point in time.
Mm.
Microsoft recently, I think, is bigger than Apple again, but just a little bit. So,
Uh okay, I didn't research that, so I'm not even gonna give
well,
it. I'll let that hang out there. I don't know. I don't know. Because I could have swore it was the other way around, but I'll leave it be.
Apple was the biggest for the longest time,
Right.
maybe for 10 years now. But the last data point that I saw was that Microsoft is now bigger again. And
Okay.
uh, their new CEO has been very successful at propagating
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft solutions.
Yep.
Anyway, focusing on SharePoint and knowing that we have a limited amount of time, I do have quite a number of questions for you.
Let's do it.
And as an expert, I think you're in a position to answer those questions and also be a resource for my community in terms of if they need some assistance, both with not only typical help desk types of situations, but doing a SharePoint propagation and install in their organization. You'd be an excellent resource for that. At
Well,
the
let me ask you. Let me ask you. How would you describe your audience so I
my
could tailor these
audience is my
answers
audience
properly?
my audience is CEOs of SMB and lower middle market.
Okay. All right. Gotcha. Too easy.
All right. So fundamentally, what problem is SharePoint trying to solve? Could you put that in a sentence or two?
Yes. The problem SharePoint is okay. Collaboration. Right. That's what I would start with. The word share in SharePoint is pretty much, yeah, we're sharing resources. So where you're falling short with collaboration, I think SharePoint can plug itself in there and help out.
And would you say that it strikes me as that they've probably got, I took a little time to look at a couple of YouTube introductions to SharePoint prior to
Mm-hmm.
our discussion. And uh, I'm relatively familiar with the idea of a collaborative platform, but there's multiple collaborative platforms in the market today, and they let's say they have different niches, and I'd love to get your comment on that. Now, I'm going to give you some names.
Yeah.
In my organization, we used Line, and after I sold my company, my prior company, the company that bought our company used Slack
Mm-hmm.
as a collaborative tool. We also used an internally baked FileMaker application as a data repository.
Mm-hmm.
On the simpler side of life, anybody can go in these days and create an environment in an application like WordPress
Mm-hmm.
or or GoDaddy for that matter. I
Yep.
mean, some of the tools it strikes me as very similar. Uh, and some of those tools, they're varying levels of complexity. Some of them are narrow, some of them are broad. What's your opening thought on comparing SharePoint to any of the ones I mentioned?
All right, so let's break this down. If you have a file storage system, you don't compare SharePoint to that. You compare one of SharePoint's features. So one of SharePoint's features is that it does document management. So when you have, I think you said FileMaker or Google Drive or Dropbox or whatever it is, when you have those platforms that are specifically for hosting documents, SharePoint has one feature, which is their document libraries that allow you to host documents. So that's how you make that comparison. If you have a comparison like WordPress, what does WordPress do? WordPress lets you build websites. It's fairly user friendly for the type of person who would call themselves dangerous with technology. They find themselves, easily to touch on technology. That's another feature, one feature of SharePoint. So SharePoint allows you to build websites in kind of like a drag and drop situation like WordPress. So we cleared the document libraries. That's a document hosting situation. SharePoint also has a SharePoint sites feature, which is like WordPress. Then there's another major feature, and it's a SharePoint list. So this is where you have some. If you're currently using a spreadsheet, SharePoint lists is the best thing I can do. Is the best I can do to compare it to your spreadsheet. So the three major features of SharePoint are SharePoint libraries. That's for document management. You have SharePoint sites, which is for building literal websites. So if you wanted to build your intranet, your company's intranet on SharePoint, you have the ability to do that. And then there's SharePoint lists, which the first comparison I make there is spreadsheets. It's better than spreadsheets, at least the way you're using spreadsheets right now. Most people I've seen use spreadsheets that, kind of using them in a way that's like not the way I think no, I'm not gonna say Microsoft. Not the best way to use spreadsheets because no one taught them and said this is the best, this is the way you should use spreadsheets. People just
It's amusing
default to using it that way.
it's amusing to me that you say that because, again, thinking back to my many years in the computer industry, uh, from the very beginning. Now, before Excel, by the way, it was Lotus 123, and before Lotus 123 was Multiplan, and before Multiplan was VisiCalc and Advanced VisiCalc.
Okay.
They're all spreadsheet tools. And
Mm,
from the very beginning, people were using VisiCalc and Excel as databases instead of as what you would typically use a spreadsheet for. So as far as
okay.
I'm concerned, I know exactly what you're talking about. You're right. I mean, Excel was never in its beginning designed to be a database.
Right.
It has tools that allow you to function as a database, and it's possible to create multiple views into that database.
Mm-hmm.
Excel. Uh, Excel is extremely powerful,
Mm-hmm.
but
You speak my language.
but to think of it as a list manager, which a lot of people do, I mean, there's a whole other world that analysts would use it for to do knockdown, drag out, sophisticated spreadsheets with all sorts of logic in them.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't normally migrate that kind of data into a list scenario. So at least I wouldn't. I mean, for sake of argument, since we brought up lists as one of the first three major things,
Mm-hmm.
how much logic does lists allow you to have in the lists?
So you don't get as much as Excel because Excel is like full blown, you know, Excel has a ton, but you got to think of it differently, right? It's like if you think of a social media platform, let's say LinkedIn. I love me some LinkedIn, right? When you go to LinkedIn, you're using an interface and putting information into an interface. And when you do that, it's formatted the way it needs to be, it's categorized the way it needs to be. In other words, if I go and make a comment on your post, when that goes inside of the database knows that I made the comment. It knows that it is a comment. It knows that the comment was on your post. It knows that it's number 3 of whatever category. I mean, whatever. As it's counting the comments on your post, it knows what number comment it is, right? So the system knows what's happening, and the system has an interface that you can. The people who make LinkedIn can change the interface and do things like that, right? That's how you have to think about the list. Where if I'm going to collect information from you, I'm going to know you did it. I'm going to make the interface the way that I want to make it. I can change the interface to look like a calendar, to look like a Kanban board, to look like a list. I can do these things. And I can do some logic as well, like some calculated columns, things like that. But the way that you interact with that list, you got to think of it differently, where it's like we're inputting data in here and we're doing the best we can to keep the format clean. With a spreadsheet, I think a spreadsheet is the last place your data should land. I don't think anyone should be entering data into a spreadsheet. You should be entering it into something else, and then if you want to, run some metrics on it, export that clean data into your spreadsheet.
Yeah, good
That's the way I'm
enough.
looking at it.
I'm sorry, what?
I said that's the way I'm looking at it
Yeah.
when
No, you're right.
talking about, that formatting.
You're absolutely right. And uh, lists are a form of a database. And a database, I mean, there's plenty of databases out there, including Microsoft products. And what's the current mainline Microsoft database?
Oh,
Is
Dataverse? Are you talking about Dataverse?
I really don't know because I don't use their product.
Yeah, it
So
might be.
it
It's
used
either
to be
Dataverse or new.
it used
They
to be
renamed it.
Access, and then
Hmm.
the more sophisticated one was SQL Server,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
the new name is
So I think it might be Dataverse, and if it's not Dataverse, they've changed the name again. But here's the thing: those tools are literally databases. SharePoint List is not necessarily a database. You can kind of think of it that way, but I wouldn't say that because the power of a database, the power of a database when you compare it to lists. But a list is more like a really powerful table,
yeah.
and you can connect these
I get
tables.
it. I think
Yeah. Okay. All right.
most people will get it. It's it's a simple list manager that for practical use. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so let's leave it like that.
Okay. I
Now,
like that.
so when I buy Microsoft Office, I'm getting, I guess there's multiple versions, right? But I'm going to either get Excel, PowerPoint, Word, and uh,
Outlook.
Outlook, right? And then there are lesser known components. SharePoint is actually one of the lesser known
Yes.
components, right?
Yes.
So on the one hand, you could look at it like the market penetration of SharePoint is every bit as big as Microsoft Office.
Right.
On the other hand, I think that would be a very fallacious way to look at it
Right.
because what percent of people with Microsoft Office are using SharePoint? I'm not going to say zero, but it's probably less than 5%. Would
It
you?
is. I don't know the percentage, but I'm with you in that it's very low. It's
Yeah.
really low. You know what I mean? And which is why I think that there's so much upside because I have two things I have to do. I have to make people aware and then I have to educate. That's what it is when it comes to SharePoint. The community of people that I don't really have to educate on SharePoint that much is the public sector. Microsoft just has market penetration. It's just like that. You know what I mean? And with the public sector, they know what SharePoint is. It's a 4-letter word in a lot of those organizations, but they know what it is. Outside of that, there's a lot of people who obviously know what Microsoft is. They obviously know what Excel is, but they have zero idea of what SharePoint is. They don't even know they have access to it. So I have to like bring awareness and then I have to educate. So to your point, I don't know the percentage, but I'm with you. It's probably super low. Like nobody knows about it.
Very underutilized application with lots of potential.
Mm-hmm.
But now here's another inflection point. is there are fundamentally two kinds of users. And let's just call one power users, and then let's call another one uh, clerical people. If,
Okay.
if I don't know if that's an artificial distinction. I don't think it is.
When you say that, I think of administrative. Is that fair?
Administrators probably in the middle somewhere. I mean, there are
Oh, okay.
probably some sophisticated administrators, but power user. The reason I draw the distinction towards a power user is there. Let's say there's a SharePoint install.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody has to design it.
Mm-hmm.
So, in other words, if there's 8 or 10 different major features of SharePoint. You listed three, but also includes project management, and it includes some other types of management, and it also includes aspects of security that need to be considered depending on how big
Yep.
your company is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if I was just reading that basically if you set the security wrong, and here's the worst case that you could possibly have is to take a relatively big company and take everything and put it into one instance of SharePoint and then set the security to public by accident, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
all sorts of confidential material suddenly got released in and you don't even need to be a hacker. You just go find the URL and you can download any or all of that information. It
Yeah.
would be a complete and total disaster. So
Yes.
so the person then needs to say, we have a use for SharePoint in this organization. Maybe that's the CEO, or maybe that's a VP that would like to do a SharePoint installation. But still, someone needs to more or less be the architect for that installation.
Yeah. So I got a few thoughts behind that. So first, when I was saying administrative, I mean like not a SharePoint admin. I mean like someone who literally does administrative work, kind of like a executive administrator. So
Right.
like who's like a EA to the leadership or something like that, right?
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
do a lot of administrative work. Now, to the point of where how you manage the install. First, there's no more install. The way SharePoint used to be, yes, you needed to have it like implemented. You need to install it. But what a lot of organizations don't know is that once they are paying for Microsoft, at the point that they're paying for Microsoft and allowing all their folks to have the apps you named, Excel, PowerPoint, all the rest of them, you have also now paid for them to have access to SharePoint. It's there. It literally exists because what Microsoft did was took it away from people like me from you having to access people like me and have me do things with SharePoint. They just made it an end users tool. So before you needed permission, you needed to reach out to me and have me do a thing. It's now changed where it literally works like PowerPoint or Excel. You just turn it on
Yeah.
and use it. You know what I
And,
mean? So that's the other thing.
so Thurman, I get that, and
Mm-hmm.
but I want you to understand this. I think like a CEO, all right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's generally a very good thing when you're playing with software tools.
Yep.
And as much as you're 100% correct that anyone can open Microsoft Office, click on the SharePoint button, and open the app and create, right? They can just create whatever they need to create.
Mm-hmm.
Great. But if you think of it in terms of a pervasive tool within an organization,
Which it is.
and by pervasive, I mean there's there needs to be a strategy
I
of
agree.
how is this tool going to be used? Who's the audience internally? Who's or externally? Who's the audience for the tool? What kind of information are we going to share? What kind of information should we not share or should we share?
Mm-hmm.
There's a fair amount of analysis, and particularly if you're going to launch into something broader. Here's the problem. You have the cross product of personal productivity, which all those other apps are. Excel, personal productivity. Word, personal productivity. PowerPoint,
Yes. Yep.
personal productivity. Now SharePoint could be personal productivity, but in reality, It's personal productivity on steroids that could affect the whole company.
1000%. You are correct. Yes.
Yeah. So you, other than creating a SharePoint instance just for me, for my own purposes,
Hmm.
which you can see why I'm almost struggling with this, because the minute you make this, if you had a company with 2,000 people or 5,000 or 25, whatever, pick a number.
Hmm.
And any person with the mental chops to understand it and use it can go ahead and create something. It would be very easy. On the one hand, it's very easy to create a personal productivity tool out of it to manage a project. The minute you open it up to collaboration, you now have an audience.
Yep.
And that audience needs to be trained how to use it. They need to understand where you're going with this particular instance
Yep.
and how it fits into the organization's operational strategy. Because I mean, on the one hand, if you're thinking about marketing, like one video I watched on it, you talk about marketing. Marketing can be internal or it could be external,
Hmm.
and hopefully it's generally benign, and positive, but so many other areas have tremendous impact. And if you're running a big project that involves, let's say, a software development group, and you're going to create a project management instance inside uh, SharePoint to run software project management,
Hmm.
suddenly, anywhere from 10 to 500 software developers are all going to be touching this and using this and taking direction from this. So, again, all I'm trying to say is thinking of it as a personal productivity tool uh, potentially is fraught with danger. And so,
You're correct.
yeah, and
I agree.
yeah, yeah. And so someone like yourself who's a SharePoint expert and in a position to help people think through both the opportunities and the pitfalls of how to go about it, you could be invaluable to someone who wants to begin a more pervasive and controlled use of
Yes.
SharePoint.
So here's the thing. This is what I was gonna say is that, so first of all, yes, that's why I'm here. That's why me and my company is here. We focus on education. How can we be in between the tool and you? Because I've been using it for the last billion years. But now that Microsoft turns it over into people's hands, they have this powerful tool and have no idea, all the ramifications that come with it. So I try to get in between the end user and Microsoft and say, look, they gave you this tool. Let me show you how to use it. Now, here's the other thing I thought about, right? Like how you can hire an MSP, a managed service provider, right? That you have that external set of the external team that might do something like your HR, or they might do something like your IT. This is my thinking. I think that those MSPs should have a SharePoint person on their team because you're already managing the IT. You should come along with SharePoint. I mean, I can come in, support your company, and do it straight in my lane as a SharePoint person and, help that way. But I think when you marry the IT with SharePoint and other Microsoft tools, that MSP becomes super valuable to the end user because you said your customers, I mean, the customers, you said your listeners are CEOs. Here's what I would tell a CEO: you just need to be aware. I don't think you need to be in the weeds trying to build things for your website. I mean, for your business, but you need to be aware. So here's how you get aware. If you know that your MSP handles your IT, you know that they're telling you to keep your passwords updated, they're managing your devices, they support your help tickets, all of that stuff, right? You have them externally. You need to be aware of all of the things that you just said, George. That's crazy. So as long as you're aware, you can now intelligently speak to your MSP and say, listen, we have SharePoint. What can we do with it? Or we have SharePoint. Are we in compliance? Are we where are our security holes or whatever and stuff like that? If you can do that, you're two steps ahead because it is very it's a dangerous tool. You know what I'm saying? It's a powerful tool that if you know what you're doing, to your point, it could get crazy. You know what I'm saying? You could expose all kinds of things.
So does someone like yourself contract out to multiple MSPs to perform that function, or do you
I
think
don't.
you do not?
Yeah, I don't. I don't because it I haven't socialized that yet. And also it can't be just me. Like it if I reach out to 5 MSPs right now, I'm cooked. You know what I'm saying? If I reach out to 2, I'm cooked. It's not enough
It doesn't scale.
I don't have enough bandwidth to do that. Right. So what
Yeah.
I think we would benefit from is I guess the term would be like an incubator. I've thought about this too, right? Because the community of SharePoint people is very small and it's hard to get somebody to get a SharePoint job because highly likely they're already good in their SharePoint job, getting paid well and living good. There needs to be more SharePoint SMEs because again, Microsoft kind of they kind of screwed y'all. And they turned over this tool and didn't say anything. And now people who just know, like they know how to Google, they know that they have access to this thing. So we need more SharePoint folks to support these organizations because you're paying for the 365 suite already. You need to maximize this tool. So yeah, a little bit of a conundrum that we're in here.
So one of my questions was why is it underutilized? And I think what we've just been discussing is at the heart of the answer, is because there's much more to it than just building your own personal private spreadsheet.
Well,
So
I would say the number one reason in my mind is promo. I think that a number of tools get utilized when it has good anything, when it has good promo. If Microsoft spent time promoting SharePoint, then it would be crazy. But they don't promote Excel like that. They don't promote PowerPoint. They don't promote Word. It's just I think you mentioned it earlier. It's just when you show up to an organization, that organization is already paying for Microsoft, and you just sit down and use the tools that you see other people using. So I'm gonna use PowerPoint when it's time to do what I saw this other person do. I'm gonna use Word same way, and I'm gonna use spreadsheets the same way. Same with Outlook. Even though there's a right and wrong way to use email, people just do what they see other people do. They don't really get like formal training that says this is the way you should use X tool. It's just Microsoft's market penetration.
so promotion is part of it, but uh, again, I'm going to just give you my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
The typical person that I would see using SharePoint is a power user. I I
Right.
I do not. In other words, if you're on the receiving end, fine, then you could be clerical or administrative because someone else created the system. But someone needs to create a system for a particular business function or multiple business functions. And then whoever the community of users are, you show them how to use this thing you created, but you do not expect them to modify the installation
Correct.
or the configuration, maybe is the better word. You because never in a million years are they going to do it. I mean, there's two completely different. I probably shouldn't say this, but and my wife's not the only one that says this, but hundreds of people I know say I'm not a computer person, and they
Absolutely.
have they have jobs that they use a computer all day long. They use a computer, and then
Mm-hmm.
they'll go home and say I'm not a computer person.
But you know what else they use? They use spreadsheets. There are people who use spreadsheets and they use them pretty frequently and they go crazy and build these systems inside of their spreadsheets. Those people, they're probably power users too, because most people are not going to build a whole system inside a
Yeah,
spreadsheet. But those people, they would love SharePoint.
exactly. That's my whole point,
Mm-hmm.
and
Okay.
I think we agree on that. So, but in my perspective, that is another reason of underutilization is because that person, there's a even though SharePoint's not terribly difficult to learn,
Mm-hmm.
you still have to take the time to learn it and think about it.
Yes.
And people that are already engaged with other tools, you know, reality is we hear information overload. There's also tool overload, right?
Yep.
How many different software tools am I supposed to learn until I get tired of learning new software tools?
Yep.
And like myself, I've been using software tools for 40 years, and uh, I feel no problem learning a software tool, but that doesn't mean I want to. I
I'm
have
with
to
you.
be really motivated to learn a new software tool. And I think that's true in any organization. You've got what they call early adopters and visionaries, and generally they're younger, that want to go out and, conquer the world. And so it doesn't bother them to learn as many new tools as they need to get done what they want to get done.
Yeah, George, real quick. Let me tell you this though. If you are that person that is like fiddling with your spreadsheets, you can get to a point where you're doing certain things and it's super frustrating. I I rag on spreadsheets, but I never tell people to stop. Well, yes, I do. I'll say stop using spreadsheets because it's good marketing. But I don't want you to stop using spreadsheets. I just want people to stop using them incorrectly. Because when you use them incorrectly, you get frustrated. You want the tool to do a thing, but it wasn't even built for that. So my process is you're going to take the time to build your system anyway. Build it in SharePoint. You know what I'm saying? And then you can still use your spreadsheets because your boss is going to still ask for spreadsheets. Your colleagues are going to still ask for spreadsheets. You can still export that data out of there. But if you're going to take time to like build a quote system inside of a spreadsheet, I bet you would love it if you built it in SharePoint and then use the surrounding tools around in the Office 365 suite. Just want to put
So,
that out there.
because I know we're going to run out of time, repeat for us one more time, uh, not so much the tools themselves. We talked
Mm-hmm.
about the list manager, the collaboration manager aspect, and there was a third one. What was the third one?
Oh, so it's
Communication.
sites, lists, and libraries.
Yeah. So data management, uh,
That's the list.
data slash document, document management.
That's
Two
lists and
different,
libraries. Yeah.
yeah, two different things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So at any rate, in your experience, those people that are using SharePoint, which of those get the most traction?
Mm, that's a good one. Okay. So when they have leadership buy-in, they're gonna get a ton of traction. And I'm talking about will you get the top of the company to buy in? If you can do that, that's great. But you probably will struggle with that. If you can get your department lead or your office lead or whoever it is to buy in on what you're doing, you're going to get a lot of traction and a lot of leeway. Also, if you are the type who, if you consider yourself a problem solver, you will get the most traction because SharePoint is just too vast. There's just too much going on for you to sit down and be very straightforward with it. So the way I teach people is when you have something very specific that you need to do, that's how you can get the most out of it. So let's just say, a project manager will have to create a risk register. If you don't already have a tool that does it, you might want to create a risk register using a spreadsheet. I would show you how to build a
If you
risk
don't
register in
mind, if
SharePoint,
you
and
don't
you can
mind,
get a lot of
that's,
traction.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but if you
No,
don't
no.
mind, that's a term that you use even on your website, risk register. I've never heard that tool,
What do you
that
call
term.
a where you put all your risks in your what do you call that?
Um, I don't know how to answer that question.
So you've never heard the term of, I mean, but all right, you've heard of risk management.
But you're conflating it with project management, right? And project management is task oriented and goal oriented.
Uh-huh.
Risks is a sideline, a management aspect that sits on top of running the actual project.
So
That
you're saying when you approach a project, You look at risks as primary.
First of all, I only manage projects at an executive level. Now,
Mhm.
I used to actually manage big projects personally, and I
Okay.
would use project management to do it. And the typical approach to project management, there's Gantt charts and PERT charts.
Yep. Yep.
And I like the kind with the sequential boxes. Probably most people don't use those. They use Excel, and they use it in such a way that they have all the tasks lined up, and they have bar charts and so on, within Excel. But in my view, project management is about the critical path. What are the sequential steps that need to happen?
Hmm.
Um, how many subsequent steps get delayed when you don't hit a deadline? And I need to know who are my resources,
Yep.
how do the resources match to the tasks, and what is the timeline? Those three things are the essence of project management. Risk
So,
management is an
oh,
overlay to the whole system.
okay. I need to know more about this. I'd love to hear more about this. But, well, and let's say something like a WBS, a work breakdown structure. Would you use one of those in your projects?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly what I just said. A work breakdown structure is which tasks get assigned to which resources or
Right.
groups of resources and in what sequence.
Okay. Now, project managers will create a WBS in like Word, or they'll create it in a spreadsheet. And to your question about who gets the most traction, a WBS is extremely specific. So if you needed to build a WBS for your project, you would probably build it in Word or Excel, like if you had to build your own. But I would come in and say, if you built it in SharePoint, it would be better than you building it in Excel and Word. And then you can get, to answer your question, that's how you get the most traction. You build something specific, like you actually have something very specific that you need to build and use, like a WBS, or in my case, a risk register as well, which I know project managers use. So that's to answer your question about who gets the most traction is when you have a specific thing that you have to do. And I can show you how to build it in SharePoint.
Okay, very good. So I understand you have an appointment coming up, so I'm going to respect your time on that. There's so much more we could talk about. Maybe we should do another one of these in a month or two.
Yes, please.
And see where that takes us. But for right now, Thurman, what I'd like you to do then, because I appreciate all of this discussion we've had, how would someone who is interested in utilizing your expertise, how would they get in touch with you?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn every day and my DMs are open. But if you want to get started with SharePoint, you can go to sharepointfreebie.com. I got something special there for you where you actually learn how to build a list and then use it. But if you want to just reach out, I'm on LinkedIn every day.
Do you want to share a phone number?
Oh, 443-707-7208.
There are some of us dinosaurs that our first instinct is to pick up the telephone.
It's all good. It's all good. I forgot about phone numbers.
And just
All right, cool.
again, for my own benefit, to summarize for our listeners, again, I'm George Kriza. I'm the CEO of Challenging Decisions. What we have found over the years, and to some extent, this is a perfect example of this discussion today. CEOs uh, need to make important decisions for their organization from time to time. They're a fish out of water. They might understand their product or their manufacturing or their service beautifully, but in terms of understanding a new technology, understanding a culture problem, understanding a finance problem, and overcoming a major issue in their organization, they often need help. They need senior help. And
Mm-hmm.
I like to leverage my background of 25 years as a Inc. 500 CEO, managing high growth and high productivity organizations. We learned a lot about execution, and we're available as a resource. So you can get to me at challengingdecisions.com. And my phone rings at 312-320-7760. So you're welcome to certainly reach out and have a conversation about how we can help. But for now, Thurman, we'd like to thank you so much for the time we spent. And this, we'll put this podcast together and have it online, no doubt within about 24 hours. And
Sweet.
we appreciate very much the time you spent with our audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really, really enjoyed this. I wish we could keep going. Most definitely.